So we've come to kind of a break or discontinuity, at least from my perspective, in Panchen Rinpoche's text, the Mahamudra. You'll recall that he laid out the general framework in an introduction, preliminaries, and then went into, I think, a very, very clear presentation of Shamatha, highlighting two methods, particularly drawing very heavily on the Mahamudra tradition. So those particular methods and explication of them, I'm not sure you'll find that anywhere in Gelugpa literature prior to him. So he's clearly drawing on the Kagyü, the Mahamudra literature on Shamatha, that is designed precisely to prepare you for venturing into the Mahamudra Vipashyana on the nature of the mind, designed to prepare you for realizing Rigpa, Mahamudra. And that was finished. And then he returns to the Mahamudra in the Vipashyana section, and then again he's citing one classic source after another in the Kagyü tradition, the Mahamudra tradition. Very, very classic, brief citations from Saraha and so forth, which are very representative. He's a great scholar, it goes without saying. Very representative of the kind of approach, the examining origin, location, and destination, and so forth, that is very characteristic of Mahamudra Vipashyana practice, prior to identifying Rigpa itself, right? Prior to that. Didn't comment a whole lot on it, didn't really lay out, I didn't see much in the way of integration of Gelugpa approaches to Vipassana, but rather simply set forth, here's a very good sampling, authentic sampling of Vipassana avenues within the Mahamudra tradition. He did that. He did it very clearly, authoritatively. And now he's finished with that. And now he's going to start another section of his presentation. And for those of you who've studied Gelugpa, and specifically studied Vipashyana, studied Madhyamaka in the Gelugpa tradition, I can assure you it's smooth sailing from here on. That it'll be very familiar, very, very familiar. I mean, you'll find little, if anything, in the following presentation that you won't find in Tsongkhapa's own presentations of Vipassana, in his medium Lamrim, his great Lamrim, and so on, his great commentaries to the Madhyamaka classics from Chantakirti, and so on, and Nagarjuna. So it's like he laid these side by side, but they are very definitely different. They're not just a rephrasing of the same method. They're actually different methods. And you can review what we've already covered in those last several pages. The Vipassana, the focusing in on the nature of mind, the ontological probe in the nature of mind in this Mahamudra tradition, and you'll not find any reference to identify the object of negation, subject that to ontological analysis to see whether that mind does in fact exist or not, that inherently exists in mind. It's not there. I've never seen it anywhere. I'm not very learned, really. It's quite narrow, but Gyatso Rinpoche has guided me to some spectacular and very representative meditation guides in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition. So the samples he's given me, I'm very confident, are representative of the ocean. He gave me a cup. That cup really is very indicative of what you find in the rest of the ocean. And there's that approach. And then there's the approach that Geshe Ngawang Taigi introduced us to way back in 1972. Classic Vipassana, based on Shantideva and Chantakirti and Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and so on. Really classic Madhyamaka. But they're different. They're different. And it's good to bear in mind that the whole point of the Vipassana within the Mahamudra Dzogchen traditions is not just to realize the emptiness of the mind, but to realize Rigpa, primordial consciousness, pristine awareness, to cut through to the very subtle mind, or the primordial mind of clear light, which in the Vajrayana context is generally found by way of stage of completion practice. And that's true in the Kagyü tradition as much as the Gelugpa, as much as the Nyingma or the Sakyapa. It's in stage of completion with the various practices of visualization, possible breathing, postures, and so forth, all designed rather strenuously, frankly, to draw those energies into the central channel, the pranas that are generally flowing through the left and right channels, draw them into the central channel, into the heart, and into the indestructible bindu at the heart, and thereby manifest, make evident the primordial mind of clear light, and that is Rigpa. And it's with that mind that you realize emptiness, and this is really bona fide, deep, deep-seated Vajrayana practice. Right? Now that's what Mahamudra and Dzogchen are for. In the Kagyü tradition, the Mahamudra, as he clearly laid out, and is clearly laid out elsewhere, I think it's widely assumed, and with very good reason, if you're a Kagyupa and you're following this Mahamudra teaching, that you are complementing your Mahamudra practice, the straight Mahamudra practice, the Shamatha, the Vipashyana, the pointing out, you're complementing that very, very likely, almost certainly, with some state regeneration practice. Very often it's Chakra Samvada or Vajrayogini. And definitely, if you're really serious, if you're a professional, you're definitely going to be spending a lot of time practicing the 6 yogas of Naropa, or the 6 yogas of Niguna, Naropa's consort, complementary. But you'll be doing that, and of course within those 6 yogas, the kind of the mountain peak that rises and casts light on the other is tummo, or chandali in Sanskrit, tummo. And it's not just, of course, about generating internal heat. If what you really want is internal heat, there's a much faster way. It's called a hot water bottle. Place it right in your tummy, you're going to feel real warm. It's nice, it's really cozy. Oh. If that's what it's for, they could have found an easier way to get warm than practicing tummo. Just look at the movie Yogis of Tibet and see how easy that is. All those exercises being done. Hot water bottle's a lot easier. But the outer display, the manifestation of this heat, is just the outer veneer. Just the outer veneer. You know, they had easier ways to keep warm during those long winter nights in Tibet than doing this practice. That's the outer veneer, but what's that indicative of? Of course, is all of the energies of the coarse mind and the subtle mind dissolving into the very subtle energy, coarse mind, subtle mind dissolving into the very subtle mind, manifesting the primordial mind of clear light, and realizing emptiness from that perspective. And so that's your kind of your muscle, is the 6 yogas of Naropa, and within that especially the tummo practice, of which Milarepa, Marpa, that whole lineage, they are masters, and they're still mastering it. They're still very great tummo adepts living today. And then the Mahamudra is the grace note. You know, it's just that flourish to realize what you've been set up to realize with the 6 yogas, the 6 dharmas of Naropa. So it's assumed you're going to be complementing that. And that's often done in the Dzogchen tradition as well. They'll do Tsalung retreats very, very commonly. When I visited Ganten Tugul Rinpoche's monastery up in Bhutan a couple of years back, right then they had a tent up for about 30 monks who were going through really intensive Tsalung practice. Practices involving the energies, the nadis, the bindus and so forth. Very, very demanding. You want to be young to do that. I doubt that there are any 60-year-olds in there. They're probably in their 20s and 30s, maybe even teenagers. It's very physically demanding. And so they were right in the middle. We never saw them. They were cloistered. They were really going full out, doing those kind of practices you can see done that were demonstrated in the movie Yogis of Tibet. Awesome. That's straight Nyingmapa. He's an accomplished Dzogchen practitioner, teacher, adept, and so forth. So it's very much part of the Nyingma as well. When we come to the next section in Panchen Rinpoche's text, there's no tummo. As he said, hey, I'm teaching Mahamudra in a Sutrayana context. He's not teaching tummo. He's not teaching stage of completion. He's not teaching any of that. He's going right to classic Vipashyana meditation on the nature of emptiness, which you realize with a subtle mind. If you've achieved Shamatha, you realize with the subtle mind. But I think you'll see for the rest of the text, which I've now edited all the way through. So I've polished from my perspective. I've polished the entire translation now. So nice to have that finished. There's no reference. There's no reference to the, to going beyond the mere realization of emptiness of the mind, to realizing the primordial mind of clear light. There's no reference to it. It's Sutrayana. He already said, Sutrayana. But what about the interface between these two? And especially if we look at Dzogchen, where Dujum Lingpa, or by way of Dujum Lingpa, Padmasambhava says, the stage of generation and completion, not absolutely indispensable. To be very helpful, to be sure. Indispensable? No. Shamatha, indispensable. Just like Panchen Rinpoche said. Vipashyana, indispensable. You must realize the emptiness. And then tekchu, yeah, of course, that's the essence of it. Chökyi, for most people, Chökyi will be necessary. Some, the very gifted, can practice just tekchu, cutting through to pristine awareness, and that'll be enough to achieve rainbow body. That'll be enough. Most, they will want to engage in the direct crossing over, which is a visionary practice. So what's the relationship between these two? This different approach that he's already now summarized, and he's not going to say much more about it, of the kind of Vipashyana teachings, the pointing out teachings from the Mahamudra tradition, compared to the straight Gelugpa take on simply realizing the emptiness of the mind, of the self, and of all phenomena, because he's going to cover all of it. It's going to be a very condensed presentation here. What's the relationship there? Well, I can draw a parallel briefly, and that is in the Vajra essence, which is my mainstay. I keep on referring to it, and I will again. He refers to the preliminaries, he goes to Shamatha. He says, achieve it, settle the mind its natural state, with the substrate consciousness. And then he goes right into Vipashyana. A rather lengthy presentation, something like 30 pages or so. And he's analyzing, he's investigating it, and I will say with utter confidence, completely in accordance with Prasangika Madhyamaka, as is taught widely in Tibet, and is clearly, emphatically taught by Tsongkhapa. To my mind, there's no doubt that the emptiness he's teaching, that he's guiding people to realize, Padmasambhava by way of Dujum Lingpa, is exactly in accordance with Prasangika Madhyamaka, but he doesn't speak about identifying the object of refutation and then applying, logical analysis to it. He does spend a lot of time really unpacking how phenomena exist as dependent or related events. Denjing Dawa Jungwa or Prachitsamappada. He does that a lot. And he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop in the Vajra essence with the investigation of emptiness until he's covered everything. And that is yourself, he does it. Mind, of course, but all other phenomena as well. And so you come to the conclusion of great emptiness, that nothing in the entire universe exists by its own inherent nature. And then he moves on. Right? So it's no way overlooked. No way overlooked. So, but again, the juxtaposition, how do you can do one, you can do another, but that doesn't necessarily elucidate how do they fit? How do you understand the Kagyü approach, the Mahamudra approach, from the perspective of Gelugpa? And how can you understand the Gelugpa from the perspective of the Mahamudra? And I'm not sure that he does that so much. I think he lays them out kind of side by side. But then a couple of years back, about 2.5 years ago, His Holiness, I sent an email to him with a query about translating some other material, Dzogchen material. And he instead of, for me, I'll go for that, he said, well, why don't you, he suggested that I translate another text I never even heard of. And it turned out to be an anthology of essays, about 8, maybe, something like that, by 2 formidable scholar adepts. They were both yogis and they were also, as I saw for myself, really quite formidable scholars. They knew their stuff. They really knew their stuff well. By 2 scholars from the 19th, early 20th century. They were both close disciples of Lerab Lingpa. And Lerab Lingpa was a contemporary of Dujum Lingpa. He died a couple of decades later, 1920-something, 26 or so. Incredible Lama. I've referred to him in the past, and I strongly recommend a wonderful biography of him called Fearless in Tibet. It's a marvelous book. So inspiring. Very well written by a Western scholar. He's done a first-rate job. It just kind of reads like a thriller. Very good scholarship, but very readable, because he's not just translating some Tibetan text, which sometimes can be a little bit hard to penetrate. Lerab Lingpa, so he was again a yogi's yogi, very accomplished Dzogchen meditator, accomplished adept, a siddha. He was clearly a siddha. There just really can't be any reasonable doubt about that. But it turned out he is also a very close ally, friend, and guru for the 13th Dalai Lama. And he devoted a great deal of time and effort to doing everything he could to working for the sake of the Tibetan people and to doing all he could to extend the longevity of the 13th Dalai Lama. It's a very close relationship. And the 13th Dalai Lama had enormous regard for him as his Dzogchen guru. So it was a remarkable relationship. he passed away in 1926 or so. I can't remember the exact date. And then his tuku turned out to be two, at least two. And one was Khenpo Jigme Pinsop, who died just a few years ago. And there's a whole story there, I'm not going to go into it. But he came to be quite widely regarded as the greatest yogi living in Tibet during the closing decades of the 20th century. Formidable. He was the one that started this community from scratch in 1980, right in the area where Dujum Lingpa had been teaching and where 13 of his disciples achieved rainbow body, a little region called Setar. He started teaching there in 1980 with probably no students. And, 20 years later, there were 10,000. 30 years later, there were 40,000. All grown up around the seed that he sowed there. Formidable, incredible impact. And the community there is absolutely awesome. I've met one of the two principal abbots, and I've corresponded indirectly with the other one. Incredible what they're doing there. And then the other of his two tukus was somebody you may have heard of, at least I think you've heard of him at least, called as Sogyal Rinpoche. Sogyal Rinpoche. So one had tremendous impact and tremendous service to Buddhism within Tibet, and the other one has performed tremendous service outside of Tibet. Sogyal Rinpoche, with his wonderful book, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and so on, and brought so many superb teachers, world-class teachers, to his centers at Lerab Ling and other centers that he's created around the world. And so those are his two principal tukus. And so I'd like to read a little bit. So this anthology of essays by two of the disciples of Lerab Lingpa, right? These were both very well versed in Gelugpa and Madhyamaka, Prasangika, Tsongkhapa's writing, and they were steeped in the Dzogchen tradition by a great, great master, Lerab Lingpa. And they wrote a number of essays just independently, I presume, on the interface between the Madhyamaka, Mahamudra, and Dzogchen. And then they were compiled, put into one volume, and His Holiness suggested I translate it, which of course I didn't say, no, I'm too busy. So of course I did, And it's being polished now. So I thought this could be a nice segue to kind of weave together from two individuals, and I have excerpts from two essays, both of them, they're really quite impressive. So I'm going to read a little bit. We have just 10 minutes, but I'm going to read a little bit. I think you'll find this is worth your time. Okay. So the first one, his name is Lobsang Donga Chökyi Gyaltsen Cho. Simply his name, one of these two principal disciples of Lerab Lingpa, and he wrote an essay called, in English translation, Oral Instructions of the Wise, Questions and Answers Regarding the Views of Mahamudra, Mahasandhi, which is Sanskrit for Dzogchen, and Madhyamaka. So that could be interesting. Now, this is excerpt because the essay goes on like 20, 30 pages. But here, I think, pertain exactly to what we've been looking into. And we're right now at that border between the straight Mahamudra approach and then the Gelugpa approach, between Mahamudra and Madhyamaka. So here's what he says. When engaging in such Mahamudra meditation, Shamatha is achieved by focusing on the mind, such that one seeks the view on the basis of meditation. Isn't it nice to see that, kind of ring bells? I've heard that before, I'm sure I've heard that. I can't remember where, but I'm sure I've heard it someplace. So we really see it's in the current there, right? We know exactly what he's talking about. That kind of slips us into a comfort zone. Independence upon this shamatha, the shamatha focus on the mind, which you've now had very clearly explicated. Independence upon this shamatha, the mind is settled with the aspect of correctly determining the origin, location, and destination of the mind as being identityless, empty of inherent nature. So first you settle in the mind, and then you turn that mind in upon itself, doing the ontological probe to its origin, location, and destination, until you see the mind is empty of identity, empty of inherent nature, in terms of its origination, its location, and its moving on. So there's your Vipashyana. He just summed it up in one sentence. But he tells you the strategy is really, really clear. You achieve shamatha first, and then you make quick work of this. You don't just agonize over it for decades. With the reinforcement of Vipashyana, so you gain that insight, and then you empower it with your Vipashyana, and you reinforce, you probe, you just get, it's like being in a lucid dream and getting more and more and more lucid. You can get lucid and still not be able to walk through walls, right? understand it more deeply, more thoroughly, more incisively. So this is how you fortify the clarity, lucidity of a dream, and this is how you fortify your Vipashyana. With the reinforcement of Vipashyana, there are two stages in general. So now that, okay, here we are. Specifically in the tradition of Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa, there's the method of identifying the essential nature of the mind, independence upon Chandali. The essential nature of the mind, now we're talking about its ultimate nature, not just its relative nature. Primordial mind of clear light, independence upon Chandali, upon tummo. Okay? There, classic. So that is called the Mahamudra. That realization of the essential nature, the primordial, the unborn nature of the mind, combining the methods of Mahamudra and tummo, that's called the Mahamudra. In the Gelug tradition, Panchen Lozang Chökyi Gyaltsen wrote a root text and auto-commentary on the unique form of Mahamudra according to the oral lineage of the Mahasiddha Dharmavajra and his spiritual son, who was Sangyayeshe. And Sangyayeshe was the root guru of Panchen Rinpoche. So he's, of course, alluding to the text, the root text and commentary we're studying right now. Right? So we have these two approaches. Okay? So there was just a nice overview. Let's go a little bit more. The other, that was a very brief excerpt from a very long and detailed essay. It'll get published. Wisdom has agreed to publish it, so it'll come out. Even if I die, somebody's going to polish it and get it come out. It'll be fine. So then the other author of this of the essays within this anthology is Jetsutum Zambo. Jetsutum Zambo, again a disciple of Lera Pingpa. And one of his essays is called An Ornament of the Enlightened View of Samatha, Secret Guidance Nakedly Granted to Dispel All Misconceptions Regarding the View of the Clear Light Great Perfection. So, he's going to write from a perspective very well informed by Gelugpa, by Madhyamaka, but now he's going to write from that perspective to dispel misconceptions. There are a lot of misconceptions among Gelugpas about Dzogchen. They haven't studied it, they don't understand it, and therefore they very easily dismiss it. Well, he's going to help them. Maybe that's why His Holiness suggested I translate this. I don't think the Tibetan has been very widely read. I think it was a print of maybe 500 texts. Maybe it'll be, I wouldn't be surprised if it's read more widely in English than it was in Tibetan. So here it is. So again, an excerpt. The practice of differentiating, and we'll get to this, the practice of differentiating is called guidance to the ultimate reality of the mind, cittata, which is self-emergent primordial consciousness. Okay, differentiating this. This is the pointing out instructions. And Dujum Lingpa does this with incredible majesty and precision. And I mentioned it before, so I'll be very brief now. Here's mind. Here's primordial consciousness. Here's substrate consciousness. Here's Dharmakaya. And just, here's conditioned consciousness. Here's primordial consciousness. Differentiating. So you recognize the one you're familiar with, which you can identify and you can understand within the context of a conceptual framework. Does it exist? Yes. Is it born? Yes. And so forth. The intellect says, I'm feeling comfortable here. I've got it. I understand it. And he said, okay, now, apart from that, here is Rigpa. Here's primordial consciousness. Here's Dharmakaya. And you have to leave your intellect at the door. It's not to say it's going to insult your intellect. It just transcends your intellect. And once you've set your intellect behind and you're looking at the moon at which the pointing out instruction is pointing, what's left over when you've set aside your intellect and all the constructs of the intellect? What's left over? What's still there? And that's pointing out Rigpa. It's in a way by process of elimination, right? And so that's this differentiation. And just as I said to Jumlingpa, in multiple texts, most elaborately in the Vajra Essence, does it with, I just have to say, breathtaking clarity. So to proceed in the extraordinary practice of such differentiation of samsara and nirvana, you must purify the negative habitual propensities of your ordinary body, speech, and mind, and then purify your body, speech, and mind by practicing the method of transforming them into the pure vajras of the body, speech, and mind of the jinas. So he's suggesting to really prepare yourself to derive the full advantage, full benefits of the pointing out instructions, the differentiation between, let's say, conditioned mind and unconditioned pristine awareness. It's going to serve you very well if prior to that you've done at least some state regeneration practice. Dissolving, that is, first of all, seeing the emptiness of inherent nature of your own body, speech, and mind. Seeing that, really deconstructing that. And then out of that deconstruction, out of this non-duality of Dharmadhatu and Dharmakaya, then arising in the pure mode with pure vision of your own body, speech, and mind, and having that as your platform. So not just the platform of shamatha, but the platform of pure vision and divine pride. Viewing, engaging in this investigation from the perspective of this stage of generation. That will serve you very well. And Dujum Lingpa himself did it. He himself did it. He says so. At the beginning of the Vajra essence, he said, and after I've been practicing stage regeneration a little bit. And then he had a direct breakthrough, became a Vidyadhara. Direct realization of Rigpa. But he said, I did a little bit. Okay. So he says, that must come first. You must purify the negative habitual propensities of your ordinary body, speech, and mind, with which we have bound up in dualistic grasping, cognitive fusion, reification. You must purify that. Then purify your body, speech, and mind by practicing the method of transforming them into the three pure vajras of the body, speech, and mind of the Jinas. That must come first. By such outward and inward differentiation. Outward difference between samsara and nirvana, for example. Inward, well, obvious. By such outward and inward differentiation, you engage in the discipline of pristine awareness, in the phase of practice of purifying your body, speech, and mind. The vigorous practices of the body, speech, and mind are strenuous practices. They're not easy. Anybody who's done some state regeneration, it's not easy. Visualization, all of that, not easy. Therefore, without the practice of releasing all effort, so those are strenuous, effortful, state regeneration, state of completion, effortful, no question. But then you come to Dzogchen. Therefore, without the practice of releasing all effort and settling your body, speech, and mind in the natural states, the practice of the effortless path will be difficult. So he's not saying it's impossible, but if you've not done any of the purification of stage regeneration practice, and you just leap directly from your ordinary sense of body, speech, and mind, probably filtered with dualistic grasping and so forth, if that's your platform, it can be difficult. Just go directly from that right to pristine awareness. It doesn't say difficult, it doesn't say impossible, it's difficult. So in order to pacify all the karmic energies and conceptual fabrications, you must apply yourself to the practice of settling your physical, verbal, and mental behavior in their natural states. You know what that is? If you do that for a very long time, that is an effective method for achieving stillness. But when appearances arise as illusions, that may prevent you from cutting off thoughts of reification. And that is, he's speaking of the pros and cons of shamatha. And that is so incredibly helpful, cutting out so much conceptual elaboration, the noise, you know it very well. And you come to that stillness, which is like the sublime state, the ambrosial dwelling, bliss like the warmth of a fire, clarity like the breaking of dawn, non-conceptuality like an ocean unmoved by waves. Like, boy, do you not want to move, But if you stay there, sooner or later you have to pee. That's just the way it is, You have to pee. You can be Milarepa. I think Milarepa peed, Doesn't matter who you are. You have some biological functions, they will not be ignored. And you got to pee. And that means you have to come off the cushion. Do not stay on your cushion. Gets all wet, mushy, smelly. Really bad idea, really bad. So get off your cushion. Don't foul your nest. But when you do, then appearances arise again. And they're arising as if they're inherently existent. All the appearances arise. If your cave, your meditation hut, your body, and so forth, they all arise and they're all shouting at you, I am inherently existent, I exist from my own side. And if all you've gotten to is shamatha, that doesn't give you much in the way of seeing through the lie, the misleading nature of appearances themselves. You'll just have a vivid, stable awareness of delusive appearances. Wow, I'm a marmot with shamatha. Cool. And you're making no headway at all, not one hair's breadth on the path, if you're not challenging reification. So that may prevent you from cutting off thoughts of reification, because you don't know how. What do? Just stop thinking? But as soon as you start thinking, thoughts of reification will come right back because you've not challenged them. You've not practiced Vipashyana. You've not even gotten the bull by the horns. You've not even grappled with the real issue. You've calmed the mind, that's it. But they were doing that before the Buddha ever came along. They were really good at it, right? So you must strive again. You must again strive in various activities of the body, speech, and mind, as you did before, and try to cause appearances to arise as illusions. This means Vipashyana. You've got to see through the appearances. You have to probe into the way things exist and not simply observe their phenomenological nature, right? How they appear. Thus, settling your body, speech, and mind in their natural states is a superb method for developing stillness of the mind. And applying yourself to the practice of letting be is essential for developing the wisdom of realizing the emptiness of true existence. For a disciple who is imbued with such stillness of the mind, not being disturbed by compulsive thoughts, and with the special wisdom of ascertaining the absence of true existence of whatever it appears, for such a disciple, it is easy for the Guru to point out the Dharmakaya, the primordial consciousness that is present in the ground of being. That was strategy, right? Crystal clear. When sustaining the recognition of pristine awareness, that too is easy. If you've achieved Shamatha, and you've made deep insights in Vipashyana, and you have pointing out instructions, they're not difficult. If you haven't, difficult to the point of impossible. There are many such reasons for being imbued with those qualities. So the uncommon preliminary practices are also very important. That's where they came in. The Vajrasattva practice, Guru Yoga, prostrations, bodhicitta, and so forth. And that's all for now. That's enough. I gave you a full meal. She takes it. You take at least 24 hours to digest, but there's more. So enjoy. Yeah. Such a privilege that His Holiness suggested I do that. It was very difficult to translate and very enriching to do so. Very good. All right, continue practicing.